So welcome to PartnerUp and Partnerships Podcast. All right, we're live.
I'm excited to jump in. Get to work.
The thing that matters in a partnership is the trust and sacrifice.
Proposing, building software that works for you.
Start with Jared's big expenditure that he has coming related to his partner team.
We should not start there. That was not part of the pre-call agenda. But yes, actually, I have a big bill coming up because I have to fly everyone out and put them on a boat sometime in June or July for growing partner sourced revenue by what, like 250% this quarter?
Oh, nice. Was that something that you guys agreed to in advance, or was it like a milestone?
There was a stretch goal, and I think we hit the stretch goal by we're talking basis points. And we hit it. So it's like, I gotta own up. So kicking off this one with an expensive topic. Thank you, Justin, for throwing me under the bus right away.
It was fun to see the demeanor of Slack comments change as we got closer and closer. It was like there was a lot of rah-rah and cheering going on early and on, like, oh yeah, like fight every, tooth and nail. And then as it got closer, it was kind of like, whoa, let's look at these numbers here really quick.
Are you sure that's a source deal? Are you sure?
Let's double check this one,
Yeah, exactly. You got to audit all the attribution, right?
Yeah, actually, ops on our side audits every single partner op. So the good news on that is, there's no fluff. That goes back to the the David Pilgrim episode, Justin.
David
no
Pilgrim.
fudge.
Yep. Don't fudge the numbers.
Don't measure fudge. And I apologize, everyone, I don't have COVID. I've tested negative twice, antigen and PCR, over the last 3 weeks. My entire family's been sick, so my voice has been going in and out. Apologies in advance for that. Adam, you said you just got your shot?
Yeah, I just got it 3 hours ago. So far nothing crazy. Just feel a little bit of soreness in the right arm. That's where I got the shot.
It does hurt. It does make it sore.
It makes it sore.
Surprisingly,
an
I
even
was not
crazier
expecting
story. So my wife, who I went to go get the shot with, she actually passed out about 5 minutes into it. Where right after the shot, we were waiting outside because they hold you for 15 minutes, and then she was like, I don't feel so good, and just passed out. So luckily she's completely fine, just to be clear.
Cool. Okay.
But it was I was just like, oh my God. And then I had to run back inside. We had to have her lay down. So, not to scare anyone. I mean, again, she's completely fine, but, she just gets a little bit wheezy when it comes to stuff like this.
Ouch. I did mine. I was perusing the vaccine spotter websites for when openings were coming up, and I went into log a time, and it didn't go through because somebody took it as I was trying to take it. So I logged another one, and I got through the process, and I was like, great. I think it's, 2 hours from now, my midday is pretty open. I should be good. I go look at the time, and I'm like, oh, it's 10:40. Wait, it's 10:32 right now. And luckily the medical center is 5-6 blocks away from, where I am. But I took off in an all out sprint, running down the streets of Boston to make sure I got it in time. And of course they're like, so are you experiencing any symptoms elevated temperature, difficulty breathing? And I'm like, well, I just ran here as fast as I could. I don't.
So I'm actually experiencing both.
Yeah, acute symptoms, from physical stress, but no, I'm not experiencing actual symptoms here. But grateful I got it. One dose down, one to go.
Well, hopefully this will be the end of an era. At least. The era that we knew as lockdown, everything shut down, period. This upcoming month, I think the U.S. luckily, knock on wood, is trending in that direction. So I'm excited for it. I'm an optimist. And because no one owns this podcast, at least not yet, we get to say it, Justin. Go get your shot. It's not that bad. It's not that bad.
You guys got a boat ride to get to, right?
YouTube's still going to put a disclaimer on because we just mentioned the word, and it's going to be like, if you're looking for information,
Right. Yeah. Actually, true story. Yeah. Go talk to the experts. We're not experts. We're just a bunch of opinionated partner people. Speaking of opinionated partner people, before I formally introduce Adam, I want to give a quick shout out to the Cloud Software Association. If you're not a member, go check out the website, hop in the Slack group. There's weekly master classes. I think, Adam, you did a master class on partner attribution, didn't you?
I did, yes, end of last year. So it was pretty exciting, has a pretty good turnout. But yeah, I mean, I've been at an attribution company prior to starting Partnered for 5 years, and a component of what we do is attribution. So I can geek out on attribution for more than I care to admit.
Awesome. So that's, good plug kind of both ways. I actually checked out that course and sent it to my operations team. As we start to think about scaling a lot of our partner marketing and tech partner marketing initiatives, is hey, we should have some baselines in place for attribution. So come join that and check out the CSA. So without further ado, we have Mr. Adam Michalski here. And Adam, today we're going to be talking about, I think a really exciting topic. Is we're all running around with our hair on fire, trying to like put out the latest partner fire, get the exec on board that partner, fix the thing that partner broke, or fix the deal that this rep screwed up for that partner. And I don't know that we've actively spent enough time as an industry or as a community talking about the future of B2B, kind of SaaS partnerships. So you ran a partner program at Branch that was pretty successful. You were a top, Adobe partner. You were referenced in a few different places of like what a good partner program could look like, but you decided to quit and start a SaaS company serving the partner persona, which is partnered.io, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Well, we recently got the .com, so it's just Partnered. You guys, but if you go to partner.io, it will redirect. So
partner.com, even better. That you must have closed your seed round then.
Getting there.
Okay. I just figured with acquiring the .com, but so clearly you think this market is going somewhere different than where it is today. Like, let's start there.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And the one other part that I'll add is, I host a podcast myself, the Partnered Podcast.
Oh, shoot.
We're going to be cross-posting this.
Hold on. This is a cross pod. How did we not call that out? This is a cross pod. We're just like geeking out over here. This is a cross pod. So your podcast is?
And the Partnered Podcast. So we're going to be posting episode 50 this coming Monday, and I'm super stoked. I mean, the reason why I bring it up though is because I actually think Jay McBain has talked about this a lot, and like some of the fundamental thinking that I have on just the overall future of B2B SaaS has a lot to do with like a lot of the great research and stuff that he puts out. So I think we had him on episode 26 on the Partnered Podcast, and one of the ways in which he describes it that I fundamentally agree with is like when you look at how B2B partnerships were done historically, like the vast majority of them were really done transactionally, so like reseller type agreements where you do X, I'll pay you out Y. But as SaaS has become much more prolific. It's just a fundamentally different type of business model. You have to re-earn the customer. And with that, like we're seeing a lot more like non-transactional type partnerships. We're seeing a lot more, partner marketing where you have to like re-own the customer, or basically make sure that you can re-earn the customer every single year. And with that comes a really different way of kind of partnering. So I think that a lot of the infrastructure and everything, that we could touch on obviously here in more depth, that's being built now is really because of like that tectonic shift that was happening under the scenes. So that's really what got me interested when I was working at Branch. I mean, we did a full analysis on all the other tooling out there in the market, and frankly, nothing that we could find was really solving the fundamental issues that we were looking to solve. So we started building like some stuff on the side, and then ultimately that became Partnered. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of different shifts that are happening in the market right now that in general are very, very interesting for just a broader, partnership ecosystem at all companies, like moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years.
There's an interesting conversation to have around what is the primary driver in that shift. I wrote I don't know if we'd call this, Justin, you read it, a brief history of indirect channels and what's next, ecosystem, which hopefully someday I'll publish.
Jared wrote it in a cabin in Montana.
Nice.
It kind of reads like a manifesto, but I align it a little bit to Drift specifically. And I think one of the primary driving functions is in B2B specifically is what you said. So a lot of my philosophy came after spending lots of money on Jay's research. Jay's made a good penny off of me in the last few months. Not even just his blog. The blogs are good. So go check out the Forrester blogs that Jay publishes. His free stuff's great. His research is just as good. is the shift in the function of marketing and sales. So prior to the year 2000, marketing that's the brand era, right? There's no digital channels. There's not 15,000 SaaS companies. So all of channel was oriented on the transaction because the marketer's job was to drive brand. Channel was to drive revenue, right? Like they were acquisition to, activation, sale, and retention. I mean, even go like companies that are as new as NetSuite, that's how their channel operates, right? It's a full picture, right? Acquisition, activation, sale, and then even support. Like if you're a NetSuite partner, you actually even handle customer support, like support tickets, which for us in like B2B modern SaaS would be like your partners handle customer support, right? Like there's not a single Drift partner that handles customer support today. So like there's that first one. Talk to me a little bit, Adam, how you kind of saw that first era, like that, the pre-2000s, the old channel. How much should we be thinking about the origins of channel and maybe the perceptions that people have of channel in that pre-2000s era? Or should we be like, it doesn't apply at all, ditch it, forget it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one of the ways to think about this is like, back in that era, somebody essentially owned the customer relationship, or it was a lot more black and white in that respect, that like who actually had that direct relationship. Nowadays, nobody owns the customer. The customer owns themselves. And like that buying process for that customer is not going to happen, just because they have a relationship with, John Smith at XYZ company, it's going to happen because they're surrounded by, marketing. They're surrounded by other influencers in the ecosystem that are going to point them when they ask, hey, I have XYZ problem. What's the best solution out there for that? When 2 or 3 of those influencers who are around that table say, your solution is the right solution there, guess who's probably going to win that deal? So, and then what changes is that, from there, it's not just, that first initial sale, but then you have to continue to re-earn that customer, whether it be on a monthly basis or, a yearly basis or however you structure your contracts. And the customer success component of this is also another fundamentally different piece that you need to think about, how it's not just getting that customer in the door, but then how do you make sure that they're happy? How do you make sure that they're actually continuing to expand? How do you make sure that you're upselling them, cross-selling them? All of these things are really like fundamentally different tectonic shifts. And what I kind of liken it towards is like, what we're seeing here is that, partnerships have always been, I think the one unifying factor is that partnerships have always been incredibly impactful. You look at some of the largest companies out there in the world, Microsoft, Salesforce, like a lot of these companies do the vast majority of their revenue through their partner ecosystem. It's really the longer tail of SaaS that's just starting now to understand, okay, wow, I can really leverage an ecosystem strategy to become top tier in my industry. And what we're kind of seeing because of that is like similarly to how sales went from like an art to a science, marketing went from an art to a science, like partnerships is now becoming more of a science, we're still in the early innings, but I do think like a lot of that like actual science component of this is really starting to get built out. Like how much you should be driving from individual partners. What does that look like? What does the marketing look like? Co-marketing initiatives look like? All of these different initiatives, like how do you do attribution? All of these things that a lot of that infrastructure is getting built right now, by companies like Partnered, obviously, but also like a lot of other very interesting companies in the space right now. And I think that, the next couple of years are really going to be a game changer for just how the role of partnerships is done. What does partnerships mean? What does a career path in partnerships mean? A lot of this stuff has been very opaque. And I think a lot of that is like, we're going to see a significant amount of change in that very rapidly over the coming years.
There's so much to unpack there because that goes back to the origin story of why I started the pod, and Justin's here is like, there's nothing out there. That's why I'm sure why you had a company that you were kind of building around it, but there's also, put the company aside, there needs to be a movement, so to speak, right? Like the shift to, demand generation or inbound marketing or whatever's happening in whatever space. there needs to be a movement associated with it. And there really hasn't been that ecosystem movement, but I'm starting to feel it now, right? Like we're coming together. Like there's 2 podcasts where they kind of collabed and came together to talk about this future. And I'm starting to talk to people that like, my goal is to run, a global partner program. And it's like, wait, hold on. What? Actually, I don't know if I told this story. I had a candidate interview for our account management team, and she told our VP, I need to talk to Jared, but your head of your partner program. And I was like, hey, this candidate needs to talk to you. And I was like, okay. She's like, my goal is to come in and to eventually help out with corporate strategy. And my best path to that is through partnerships. So I want to make sure that if I can crush it over here on your account management function, that I can come over and help you build tech partnerships to get a perspective on corporate strategy. And I was like, what? I've been doing this for like a long time now. You're the first person that's ever come in and has been like, hey, partnerships is like my path to a career plan. What do you see around that specific kind of career question? There's obviously the standard marketing and sales, stratification of role, VP, C-suite. I've actually never seen a C-suite partner role, so that's an interesting question. Is the partner?
It's coming slowly. We're getting there. Yeah.
So, like, talk to me about that stratification in terms of the next phase. Do you have any perspective or hot takes, if you will, on what that stratification of like the partner career trajectory might look like?
Yeah. So a lot of really good things that you had mentioned there. So I think let's start with, the stratification component. What I think, that was very interesting too, is you watched like the science of, sale, or like the art become a science in all these other different industries. And you go back 10, 20 years, or even frankly, customer success more recently, customer success went under a very like a similar type of trajectory. What's unique about partnerships is that partnerships can mean a million different things to a million different people. So it makes the problem, I would say, a lot more complex, because partnerships is a catch-all term, as we all know, but there could be tech partnerships, solutions partnerships, integrations partnerships, agency partnerships, like all of these different, types of partnering under each umbrella. And then even within those subsets, when you go to an individual organization, like they may be what they might call an agency partnership versus what somebody else calls an agency partnership could be completely different. So that's the complexity here that I think like has traditionally held stratification back. I do think that because of that movement that you're mentioning, which is very real. I mean, you look at organizations like CSA, you look at organizations like Partnership Leaders, like a lot of these areas, there's a huge yearning, for figuring this out. And it's not a simple problem. But the reality is that, the more folks that you get out there connected and talking, the more that there's going to be like industry norms around each one of these. So I don't have an answer for you for what exactly it's going to look like. But I can tell you that like the grassroots, is happening right now. And you're even starting to see, like what does a partner manager mean? Like how do you actually get like, like higher up an organization? Like more and more of that is actually happening now. And I've even seen it firsthand, where you mentioned, getting on the C level. I've had a couple of folks on the Partnered Podcast recently who have made it to the C level, like following the actual partnership path. And it teaches you a lot of different things, when you can support a partner, like it's a lot of the different skill sets that you need to become a C level exec. So yeah, I think that we'll increasingly see more and more of that. What it's going to look like, not necessarily sure, but is it coming? Yes.
Yeah. And did your outlook change after this last year? Like what you thought going into pre-pandemic, the world of partnerships is going to look like in 5 years? Is that different somehow than, how you view it today?
Good question. So I think, where I sit in the lens that I look at this is always at the intersection of like your partnership ecosystem and revenue, partner sourced, partner influenced revenue. That's really kind of like my vantage point. And from that perspective, I am even more bullish than I was, 6 months ago, significantly more than I was 12 months ago. A lot of folks, especially with the pandemic, as things have changed substantially on go-to-market fronts for most organizations, they've had to lean much more on their partnership ecosystems, because you're not wining and dining folks. You're not going to conferences. You're not going to all these different places where you could traditionally interact with folks and really expedite your sales cycle. You have to rely on somebody like that. Oh, wow, you're connected to a tech partner who's already closed that deal, and they can provide you a warm introduction, or they might, put it on your radar that they're looking for your specific type of technology, which is going to get you in at the exact right time, and then potentially give you the right talk track. Like, all of that has become, much more important. And I would say that, like, the pandemic, essentially kind of fast tracked that by at least a couple years. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting macro trends that I think, like, when you add that to everything else that was already, some of which we kind of talked about earlier happening, that, like, is only expediting the entire field in general. And yeah, I mean, I'm particularly, like, excited for what's to come.
Yeah. And I think I've definitely seen it in my own workflow accelerate the adoption of technology and be like almost like a technology first alliance manager, right? Whereas position beforehand would have been a lot of plane travel, a lot of developing relationships in an office over a happy hour, at a conference. And now it's, much more like, how can I be the most engaging over digital channels, and how am I going to stand out from all these other partners that are now in my, target partners inbox or vying for their same attention.
Exactly. Yeah. And even mapping it out, like I mentioned earlier, like, I mean, you want to figure out who are those people that are around that customer. And the more and more of those that you can influence, the more influence you're going to have on your buyer.
Yeah. What do you think in terms of, like, the future of B2B partnerships, there's the elevation, and kind of stratification, maybe even formalization of the partner functions and roles across these different buckets. But it also feels like there needs to be a movement or, a come to, the partner gods moment, if you will, around the rest of the business. So, like, CMOs being educated on this concept, CROs being educated on this concept, CTOs, CPOs, CEOs, because the best, I actually just had a call today with Brad Coffey. Brad was the chief strategy officer at HubSpot, oversaw a lot of these things, and one of the best examples in recent memory of building an ecosystem-centric company. And he talks about these key moments in their journey, and these were C-suite decisions across the board, right? There was not like this, savior partner person like coming in from the sideline being like, here's what we're gonna do, everyone follow me. It was really concerted effort across their C-suite. Yep. How do you think we start to address that challenge? Because it seems like in order for that all to be true, we also have to educate and empower the rest of the organization to have an ecosystem or partner-centric approach.
Yeah, I think you're 1,000% right. I'm personally on a crusade, to help make that more of a reality. But the reality is that we have a long way to go on that front. I think that, if you go into any organization, they know how to do direct, like it's what VCs know. It's what, organizations have been doing for years. It's what everyone has like great playbooks down. And if you want to talk about how to run like a direct playbook for go-to-market, you'll find no shortage of information out there. Indirect, particularly when coupled with SaaS, some folks are starting to figure it out, and those folks are definitely like the early movers, in the space. But there's a big learning curve there that needs to happen for a lot of those C-suite like folks, and many of those folks like have been running the direct playbook their entire lives, so they might be a little bit against change because direct and indirect are two fundamentally different things. I think what is really important is the organizations that actually understand that, and like what I always hang my hat on is if you look at the organizations that actually figure it out and really, really get it, and put the right infrastructure in place, put the right resources in place, continue to allocate resources towards their partner function, they outperform like across the board. So yeah, it's once you actually start diving into the data, you start to realize, okay, like I need to invest in my infrastructure. And you'll have some C-suite like CEOs, CMOs, and folks who understand that. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and a lot of room for, frankly, folks like us, who are going out there and having more of these conversations in more language that, a C-suite executive would think about. How do you tie to revenue? How do you do all these things that are going to be important for any type of B2B organization? I think the more and more education that happens in the space, like the faster that's going to become the norm.
Two questions that kind of come off the heels of that. As you think about kind of educating these different personas, it seems like there's opportunity to kind of, who are the thought leaders in marketing, in sales, in these different functional areas? How might we go about building those kind of community or content tracks? Like, what do CMOs listen to, right? Like, what are the places they go for authority, and making sure that there is how CMOs should think about working with ecosystem. It seems like that needs to happen. Same thing with CROs and heads of sales. And then maybe a follow on from that. Are there any role models today that aren't HubSpot, Salesforce, Adobe, Microsoft, of like organizations that you're like, hey, they're 100 employees or even 1,000, and they're starting to recognize this? So maybe two questions.
Yeah. I mean, on the latter question, I'll call out Monday.com is one who really gets this very well. We had them on early in the podcast. I think organizations, M Particle is another one of Partnered's clients, who, I mean, a lot of their business, frankly, because of where they sit in the market, they're a CDP, customer data platform. They do this exceptionally well. I mean, there are increasingly more and more folks that I'm seeing like that are actually, really figuring it out and allocating more resources to the space. I think once you usually the moment of truth, for lack of a better word, is like, once it starts to click, I mean, when you just average everything out, like how influential a partner can be on your ecosystem. I mean, at your organizations who have actually invested and put the right infrastructure in place, you're talking about sourcing, anywhere from 20 to 40, maybe, more % of your overall pipeline. And then, on the influencing side, you could be talking, 80% plus, at some organizations. Like, that is massive. That's massive, like why that was kind of the moment for me where I started to take a step back and just be like, okay, if marketing was actually, if marketing was driving as much, or sales, who obviously is going to take a massive amount of credit just because the attribution is a lot more straightforward. All of them, when it comes to the end of the quarter or the end of the year, because it's very easy to attribute their actions, they look like all-stars, but the reality is the partnerships is actually driving an outsized return, particularly when you add in the fact that they're usually a substantially smaller part of the organization. And yet in a lot of places they get treated as like second-class citizens, because, data rules everything. And at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, if you don't really have a really tight data strategy on your attribution and like tying everything to revenue, a lot of that's going to fall apart. And then guess what? Sales and marketing are now looking like the heroes again. So like, I think that when you actually like have the right infrastructure in place and really understand where partnerships can be impactful, that's when it's really going to click. And then like being able to actually add additional headcount, add additional resources for the partnership side of the organization starts to become a no-brainer.
Do you think we're still 5 years, 10 years, we're still going to be talking in terms of source and influence, or do you think there's going to be a new set of metrics that prevail over time as the data gets better, as the attribution gets better, as we have more platforms like Partnered?
Ooh, you shouldn't have asked this one because I could probably talk for an hour just on this. I think influence is going to become significantly more important, So when you go back to what we were talking about earlier on in the pod, you have all those folks that are sitting around that buyer, yes, sourcing is easy. Most organizations are going to default to sourcing, because like when it comes down to channel conflict, or you're having that conversation internally, you can point back to like first touch attribution and say, hey, it was us who actually sourced this opportunity. Right. So it makes sourcing the easy one. And because it's the easier one, most organizations will by default go to sourcing. But the reality is, like, especially in the type of deal cycles that we have today, and especially, I mean, I'm assuming more of like an enterprise deal cycle,
Right.
but honestly, it doesn't even have to be. Like, it could even be more of like an SMB type cycle. The more enterprise, though, the more this is actually relevant. Influence is going to be as important, if not more important, because that buyer is not just, going off of an introduction. They're not just going off of like one individual sourcing touch point. As we're all aware, there are multiple different things that are happening on the sales side, on the marketing side, on the partnership side, that are going to influence that decision that the buyer is ultimately going to make. So I do think that once you start to look at not necessarily like the first touch model, which is the way most organizations are being run today, it really becomes more of like a multi-touch model, where that buyer might have read a case study, and then they spoke with an SDR, but then a partner recommended them, and then another partner came in and said, hey, by the way, you should work with them for this like XYZ reason. All of those different touch points should be allocated some type of percentage of attribution, in terms of what drove the deal. But that requires having the proper, infrastructure in place.
I'm going to interrupt you there, because I think all of us conceptually probably agree around this kind of multi-touch, influence model. The question that I get really stuck on, I want to get your take on, from a capacity, operating model, headcount kind of planning perspective. That's a marketing view of the world. And most partner organizations are going to have some quota carrying component. So a channel account manager, a partner account manager, a channel sales manager, whatever you want to call them, that's dedicated to driving, outcomes with partners. How do you tie those things together? Like, hey, we have these partners, but we need people to make these partners successful. How many people do we have? And I feel like those multi-touch attribution models, we haven't quite crossed the chasm to, that's how you staff a partner team accordingly.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting one. And I mean, we made that switch over at Branch. And the way we did it was really around kind of rethinking how the entire process should be done. And I'll go into a little bit more deeper here, but keep in mind, like, Branch is a attribution company. So like, we tend to geek out on this. But yeah, I think what was interesting is, like, when you start to look at that multi-touch model, which I think, as you mentioned earlier, I think a lot of us can agree that that's the proper direction to focus, but harder. You really start to look at it as like, okay, what are all the different touch points? And on the sales side, you can use tools like Outreach to figure out like all the different emails that are going out, or, meetings that are scheduled and stuff like that. On the marketing side, you can use tools like Marketo, to figure out each one of the different marketing touch points. And then on the partnership side, a lot of the infrastructure that we've been building at Partnered, is to basically understand, how do you understand each one of the different partnership touch points? Was it an introduction, a recommendation, information? How are the partners actually helping each one of your different opportunities? And then what it takes is, like, across all three of those parts of the organization, you then need to come to some consensus, which, again, easier said than done, on what is the weighting on each one of those different touch points. Because, when you look at it as like an email, is not going to be worth as much as somebody reading a case study or attending like a dinner, or like a partner introduction. Each one of these should be weighted accordingly. And then you can use tools like a Visible or an Engagio, who are purpose built for multi-touch attribution, to basically pull all of that data from each one of those different data sources in there and run your multi-touch attribution analysis, such that you can basically look at your pipeline holistically and see how much is coming from each one of the different parts of the organization, or look at an individual deal and basically see each touch point, what happened, and apply that weighting on it to really understand, like, who realistically actually influenced that. It's a fundamentally different way of kind of thinking about this than like the first touch way or last touch way of actually getting a deal done. But I'm a firm belief that it is the way that, sales attribution should be done. And a lot of that's come from marketing. Yeah.
I'm going to ask this question maybe in a slightly different way. Let's say you have a team of, I don't know, tech partnerships managers, and then like agency partnerships managers, right? So they manage a book of 20, 30, 40, 50 agency partners or tech partners. In that view of the universe that you just mentioned, which I agree with, how do you craft their quota?
Yeah. So the way that we did it, and listen, there's still stuff that needs to be figured out on this. Like,
Right.
I think that
This is
branch
what
was
we're talking
definitely
about. This is future stuff
a
here.
little bit,
The whole
a little bit more of a
You
pioneer.
can send Jared the invoice for the free consulting after the call here.
You comp on the points versus on like total pipeline or partner sourced or partner influenced. So when you look at that weighting that we were just discussing, how every single part of the organization, they're basically going to be given a certain amount of points. And we would call them, like at Branch, we're calling them BD influence points, where whenever like somebody would get an introduction, that's 3 points. Whenever somebody would get helpful information, that's 1 point. A recommendation, 2 points. As you start to add each one of those up, they're going to be influencing everything. You still want to have like the macro numbers in play, because when the CRO or the CEO are looking at their year and they have a $100 million target, they're still going to need to see that 30 to 40 million is coming from the partnership organization. So you want to measure that and make sure that you understand like how you're tracking towards that macro goal. But when it comes down to each individual like partner manager, regardless of their role, agency, tech, that's when you can really start to break it down on more of like a point basis. And it's not going to be perfect out of the gate. Like, this is something like an end-to-end exercise that realistically could take, months, if not longer. And there will be massaging along the way. But again, I think it starts to get you a lot closer to what is proper attribution in the space, at least for how you can, as like the C level is start trying to figure out where this revenue is coming from. This gives them a much more accurate depiction. And then you can figure out exactly like all the different compensation from there.
Interesting. So to get really technical, are you also assigning a dollar value that's associated with that touch point in the attribution model, or is that just a blanket amount for all of the, 1 point equals $1 amount?
Yes. So each one of those individual touch points would be assigned to that actual opportunity. So if the opportunity is, let's just say $100,000 opportunity. And then you see the multi-touch model, like depending on how you've built it, will be able to tell you, like 30% of this was coming from sales, or it was influenced by sales. 40% of this was influenced by marketing. The remaining 30% was like influenced by, by sales. So you can start to look at it that way to really get a good understanding of like how the organization was actually influencing each one of those deals.
Interesting.
What do you see next in so there's this emerging category that you're playing in right now, Adam, which is what is, I believe Forrester is the only one and Jay is the only one that's actually called it something, right? That he published something that was, what did he call it? There's like an ecosystem. You have like the MarTech landscape.
You get the ecosystem tech stack.
Ecosystem tech stack, right? So in the MarTech space, that's JT Brinker, right, at HubSpot, right? That had the MarTech landscape. There's some sales tech. And then Jay's was the ecosystem tech stack.
Yes, he posts it annually, I think in January, if I'm not mistaken. And as of this year, I think it was the first time he did it, but he basically put together like different quadrants. The quadrant in which Partnered is playing in is, I think, ecosystem management. So if you're looking at that actual quadrant, if you're looking at the entire tech stack, it's going to be in the bottom right quadrant. And that's really, Jay is thinking a lot more about ecosystems. I think if you look at his writing over the last 2 years, like each one of these, how do all of like the partnerships play into the broader ecosystem for your company, and a lot of that ecosystem management software is being built out now as we speak. I think Partnered falls right within that. Right,
because PRM, for example, is going to have a very heavy weight on like agency, SI, tech implementation partnerships, right? So like you're not going to like in my partnership with Outreach, there's no way I'm getting 200 outreach reps to use my PRM. It ain't going to happen. There's just 0% chance. But I can get, that digital global agency, right, to register their next deal to make sure that we're fully engaged around that opportunity. It's a very different kind of place. So as you see this kind of emerging categories of technology companies, you're making a bet on one that I think is near term and there's a need now. What do you think's missing? What do you think is missing from that overall kind of like, I don't know if I want to say tech stack, but go to market, kind of purview of a B2B SaaS company?
Yeah. So, and we were just talking about PRM. So I actually think like a good way to kind of think about this, or the way that I kind of conceptually think about it is essentially like a funnel, like when you're thinking about like your partnership ecosystem, you have this funnel that you need to bring partners through. One is actually like finding the partners that you want to work with. Two is like, onboarding them, bringing them through like your training program, traditionally gold, silver, bronze, activating them, making sure that they're like, actually like, working partners in your ecosystem. But then at the bottom of, that funnel is really like managing and measuring those partnerships. And where like Partnered is specifically playing is really the intersection of like, okay, how do you have all these folks in your ecosystem, and you want to basically every B2B organization, the North Star is always going to be revenue, So how do you tie the efforts from your ecosystem back to that actual revenue target? And there's really three main problems that I think like exist in that space. One is going to be like understanding the overlap between you and your partners to begin with. Like, so what has traditionally been called like account mapping. Two is kind of facilitating the collaboration, and when I say collaboration, what's interesting is it's not just across your organization and your partner organization, but when you're talking about specifically revenue, it's actually the internal collaboration that oftentimes is where a lot of things fall apart. Because,
partner rep and seller.
Exactly. Yes. And that could probably be an entire podcast on itself.
Justin knows nothing about this whatsoever.
Yeah. I want to build my own, but
there is a lot of dynamics there that are like very, very interesting. And I think like, a lot of that is like where Partnered is focusing, just to be clear. So, for us, making the reps, think about the partnership ecosystem as another tool in their toolkit, or effectively in a cheat sheet in a lot of ways to close their deals, is there needs to exist like some technology there that can make it dead simple, because sellers have a million different things that they have to be doing on any given day, and like they're not going to be logging into a PRM. They're not going to be looking, through spreadsheets and digging through them. They're going to basically take advantage of like all of that data only if it's spoon fed to them in the right place when they're prospecting, when they're doing all these different things. So, that interaction there is really important. And then of course, all the measurement stuff that we talked about as well. The attribution, I think, is just like, it's a glaring hole, in this market that just really needs to be solved as well.
So I think that's one of the things that you've just signed up for at Partnered, is that you are going to really build out the category of content for sellers to like help them like understand why they need to be looking at, ecosystem as, a core competitive advantage. To what they're doing, like that, ecosystem cheat sheet, if you will. I want to sign up and get that stuff and put it in front of the sellers.
You're going to be seeing more and more stuff. We're going to be investing heavily in that. And I think I've done sales too, historically. Like, for me, what's interesting is that if you look at most organizations, I kind of fell into it because I was just seeing a lot of other sellers who are working with the ecosystem be the most successful sellers in an organization. And if you look at that, at most organizations, the best sellers have actually figured it out. Like, it's a way to cheat sheet their deals, but like, there's still the vast majority of sellers aren't there yet. So how do you bring that knowledge? How do you actually like democratize that? Is essentially, I think the crusade, if you will, that we're on.
Right. And I think you're going to see that with partners with platforms like Partnered, is you're going to get a lot more reps partnering a lot earlier in their career, and they're going to get a lot better at it, because the previous friction that prevented you from doing it in the commercial space and only reserved for your enterprise sellers who have big deals, is getting less and less. You're going to see a lot more people start to partner, in their first sales role, because they can go to their account, see which partners are on it. There's a workflow built around that partner in order to engage them on an opportunity. And, if your partner team's doing their job, there's a lot of enablement and support and handholding to make sure it goes well the first couple times. But I think
and exactly. And the partner manager is also like, they want this, ultimately, if you're gold on, partner source and partner influence revenue, like getting the sales team to really buy into that mantra is very important. So, a lot of work that needs to be done, but I'm pretty pumped about it. That's
Justin, that observation to me might be the underlying current that really kicks off what I would consider an actual movement. Because if
Yeah.
it's all of us partner people that are connecting and, slowly up leveling, it's not nearly as many salespeople, right?
Mhm.
I mean, if you were to take all of the functional partner roles in the United States and compare that to all of the functional sales roles in the United States, I don't even know the multiple, but I'm sure it's 10x, 20x, right? Maybe even significantly more. So if we get sellers to be educated on this, and that is a natural progression to where it's a part of like, I mean, the best account executives today, there's certain things they need to do in their job, right? There's
Right.
certain things of mastery. Like you need to be able to know how to prospect. You
Yep.
need to be able to know how to do discovery.
You need to ask marketing for account-based marketing, when you're dealing with these enterprise deals. Like
Right.
when you think about it, it's almost like, I'm not sure if I'm fully behind the term yet, but it's something that I've toyed around with, like account-based partnerships at the end of the day. It's like as an SDR or an AE are looking to close their book of business, partnerships should and will be a fundamental piece of that. It's an additional tool in their toolkit for how they can break. And I would actually argue one of the best tools in their toolkit to break into an account, because you're essentially, rather than looking at LinkedIn Sales Navigator and finding like somebody who might have met that, that prospect at a conference 12 years ago and has no way of actually getting in touch with them. Like if you can use your ecosystem to get connected directly to the seller who actually closed them, I mean, the level of information or signal to noise on that front is drastically different, so like, I think it's, again, like I mentioned, most of the best sellers at organizations have already figured this out. Now, how do you actually build the tooling to really democratize this and just make it, more of the, kind of take it to essentially where it should be, in my personal opinion.
I think this is why there needs to be forums like this for nuanced conversation, because what you just said is so true. But the layman or the person that doesn't quite understand will go, well, I connected with that seller and she wasn't willing to make an introduction for me. And it's like, no, hold on. She just gave you all the answers to the test.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Like the buying committee, the priorities. That's the job.
She's not going to fill out the test for you. She's not going to fill out the test for you, but she'll give you the answers.
Right. So that's the job of the first call. The first call is to get the answers to the test. You're supposed to come in here and develop a relationship and prove that you're going to use the information that they give you, right, in a productive way and make their customer happy. And then eventually, like once you've actually like, hey, thanks for that information. I've been a good steward of your customer and the information that you gave me. I've built trust. We've brought on this new customer. Look at how happy they are. You look great. Next time customer has a similar problem, are they more likely or less likely to make an introduction to you? Right? That's where the source can kind of come back around.
You brought a very, very good point there. It's trust, and that trust is the interesting thing here is like, most partner managers are doing that, right now where it's like, okay, cool. Like this relationship is pretty good. It's going back and forth. They're giving us some leads, as long as it's not materially off balance, like, that relationship will like continue to hum. But on the AE to AE, when you really kind of like, extrapolate everything out just to the AE to the AE, like that trust really has to be there too. It's not just between like the two partner managers. It's also between the two AEs, because that's really the secret sauce. And as a direct seller, you're not going to go out, doling out intros or information on somebody
Right.
like to people if you don't trust them.
Right.
So that's a huge piece of this as well.
And
That's the future.
I was gonna say, can I cut in with a tactic? Because I've been in that situation where reps like, oh, I didn't get an introduction from that. Like I called and it go great, and I'm like, all right, flip that around. Like say this individual, she or he is coming to you for an introduction. Did you give them what you would want to feel comfortable to make an introduction? If it's a no, then like we got to bring more to the table here. Like we got to earn that trust to get to the point where they would do that. And that is like, if you're in a management role, or alliance management role like myself, and you're working with sellers and you have sellers saying, hey, like I didn't get an intro. Why didn't it flip the script on them? And that's why it's great to have those tit for tat reciprocal partnerships, because then they have people come to them and they get to be put in the shoes of the person that's, that they're asking for a favor from. And the earlier the better, right? The earlier you can get and set them as they're a new seller and say, this is how you partner. This is best practice. Get them working on their first deal before, they're hard set in their ways and how they're going to sell at this company, then all the better.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I was a seller, would give before I got, and very, very oftentimes I would give, as much as I possibly could. But then what you'll find is that like, that will come back in spades, because then when you need something, like, other folks are like, your partner ecosystem is going to jump at the opportunity to help you. So I think it's just being mindful. Like, this isn't like a game where everything is zero sum. Like, it's, in fact, it's exact opposite. Like, you want to make sure that you want to like provide as much value to your partner ecosystem, and then you're going to wind up seeing that back in spades.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. We're going to, Justin, with that tactical tip and kind of ending on that future of partnerships where sellers are buying into the kind of like the trust required, right, to activate these partnerships. I think that's the next level of unlocking. If you get your sales team bought into that trust of working with partner ecosystem, and they know how to approach these conversations, I mean, that's when you're Salesforce, that's when you're HubSpot, that's when you're Adobe. I mean, that's what great looks like. And we'll have to dedicate an entire episode to that one. So on this cross-pod promotional, Adam, we didn't give a shout out to your sponsor, so let's give you the shout out on your sponsor.
Yes, our sponsor is Partnership Leaders. So you can check it out at partnershipleaders.com. One of the fastest growing partnership communities out there. It's just a Slack community where, I mean, if you have any questions, anything partnership related, great place to interact with other peers in the space. And yeah, the other partners, the other sponsor is just partner.io, or now, like I mentioned earlier, partner.com. See, I caught myself there. So, but yeah, no worries. If you check out partner.io, we'll go straight to partner.com. And yeah, if you have any needs on how do you drive partner source revenue, how do you get your account executives or SDRs involved in the process, we hope to be the place for you to not only learn more about that, but then also you can leverage a lot of our technology and for free, frankly, to get started and start getting that motion going. So yeah, thanks, Jared. Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Of course. This will be one of several, and then no competition between partnership leaders and CSA. So I think partnership leaders is more like the exec kind of like a paid membership where it's like really high quality, and then CSA is more of like a big giant pool of people. At least that's how I've kind of thought about it.
I'm a member of both. I think that they both have like, they're extremely complementary. And I'd encourage everyone to join both, frankly.
Yeah, join both. So that's our CTA. Adam, it was incredible. Partnered podcast, PartnerUp, CrossPod. I don't know if I've seen this in B2B SaaS too, by the way. So we're innovators. Before,
it's about time. I mean, we talk about partnerships and collaboration and audience cross-pollination.
There we go. All right, we'll see y'all next time.
Appreciate it, guys.